Yes, guys, welcome back to another video. Welcome to the George Benson football channel. Today, I want to talk to you guys about what if Pochettino remains as the Chelsea manager for next season. Before any of you start to look at the thumbnail, the title, and get going in the comments with your keyboard saying, Benson, you can't just draw against Aston Villa, see a good second half, and then claim that you want Pochettino to stay again. Absolutely, that's not what we're going for here. I'm just looking at the way that things are being spoken about at the moment, and we're going to go through the news headline today about Pochettino already starting to communicate the players that he wants and doesn't want for next season. It makes me believe, with European football still being a possibility, looking at Chelsea's fixtures and even the positives that we saw in the second half against Aston Villa, I don't think it is a foolish, stupid thing to say that Chelsea will get some kind of European football. Whether it's Europa League, Conference League or whatever, I still think that Chelsea will finish in a European place. And it has been rumoured heavily this season that European football, even if you don't like the Conference League, you don't believe in the Conference League. Look, my opinion on the Conference League is I don't think it's necessary. I think the more you dilute European football, the less important it becomes. The Champions League will always be at the forefront of everything. The Europa League is kind of like if you don't, the more you keep doing that, it's like you might as well just have a European competition for the relegation zone teams too. That being said, if I've got a choice to watch Chelsea twice a week instead of once, I'm backing it. And I'm saying that we should go for it. I'm never going to turn my nose up at it. Pochettino gets that this season for this Chelsea team. I think considering all of the injuries, considering what we've heard from the ownership about this being like a long-term project and whatever, I'm pretty sure if we achieve even a Conference League spot, I'm almost certain that Pochettino stays. Now, one thing that cannot be ignored at Chelsea this season, and for a few seasons before it, to be honest, is the injury list. On one hand, you can look at it as a method of understanding Pochettino's struggles, or even an excuse for Mauricio Pochettino underperforming. On the other hand, you've got to look at it and say, well, this is happening under your stewardship. A lot of these injuries aren't happening because of bad fouls from opposition. They're happening during the training sessions. They're happening during Chelsea training at Cobham. Now, whether or not the answer to this problem is to look at each individual player, break down what loads their bodies can actually take, I think maybe this isn't done well enough at Chelsea. I think maybe there is not enough focus on the individual load element of training in terms of what each individual player's bodies can take. The fact that all the players are so young, obviously there isn't enough data within their careers to understand what their bodies are going to be like, what their bodies are like. A lot of them are probably still developing. So for Pochettino to come into Chelsea and use so many of these heavy running centric focused training sessions, no wonder so many players keep on getting injured. Another issue at Chelsea that was an issue before even Pochettino was here was that when players actually were recovering from injury, they're rushed back into the first team too quickly. This is also a massive issue because players never really get the full chance to actually recover. And I think a big issue with this is the medical department at Chelsea. They don't seem to spend enough quality time looking at the individual load of each of these players and the capacity that each of these players have to be able to perform, not just in a match day, but also in training sessions as well. A lot of people have said that Pochettino's focus and heavy demands when it comes to running and training, it's heavily outdated. I do think there is an element of this where you can look at it like we said at the start of this segment. One hand, you can be like, we can understand Chelsea's injury list is heavy. It's an excuse for Pochettino. But you actually cannot run away from the fact that so many of these injuries occur under his watch at Cobham. So for me, this whole thing about, there's a load of injuries, it's also on the manager. If you know that a player has a certain history of a certain injury, then maybe that player doesn't engage in so many of those running drills. Or if you know that this kind of workout or this kind of session has a negative impact on that player, then it needs to be a bit more segmented. I know that this doesn't kind of go in with the whole, Chelsea need to be more of a team thing, But when you've got a bunch of youngsters who are still learning their bodies, a bunch of youngsters who have quite extensive injury records, I think when it comes to the load within these training sessions, it should be individually managed so that we can actually be a team, because they're not always flipping injured. I think at the moment we're hearing stories that at the end of the season, Pochettino's position is going to be looked at. A lot of the players' positions are going to be looked at. And then obviously as a result of that, the recruitment will become obvious, or more obvious, hopefully. And we're scrapping the under-25 ruling that we have had, which has obviously been a clear mistake, which has also inhibited Pochettino from getting the best out of this team. I have not, at no stage during this season, I've not denied the fact that Pochettino has had a lot of variables that he can't really control go against him. But with that being said, I still think Pochettino is heavily to blame for many of the on-the-field results, mentality issues that Chelsea have struggled with and as a result suffered from during the course of this season. So I want to identify a few things within this video, particularly the whole idea about systemic managers, pragmatic managers. I want to look at the differences between these two ideologies, and if Pochettino is to stay, which avenue does he need to go down a little bit more of? But the first thing that I will say, off the top of my head, a recent issue that has clearly been a problem for Chelsea is continuity. Pochettino talks about the idea of meritocracies and how if players are performing well in training, then they should be playing. But it seems to me, because we don't get to see the training, it seems to me that Pochettino really only picks the players based on what he sees in training. Because as far as I'm concerned, Trevor Chalobah, Thiago Silva as a defensive partnership, centre-back partnership I mean, was fantastic. It was doing well, looking good. Yes, granted, this isn't over a long period of time, but to then go and put Disasi and Badiashile, who have been liabilities throughout the majority of this season when playing together, in a game against Arsenal at the Emirates, the reason why we feel like we squeezed the sponge so tightly and we had nothing more to squeeze after that Arsenal game is because it was such a big defeat and there were so many obvious things that happened with the lineup, with the way that we played and capitulated, that it was kind of just like, well, nothing's changing here under Pochettino. Yes, we're not 12th so far this season compared to what we were last year. Yes, we have had so many injuries to go through, but we've also, on the flip side of that coin, spent so much money. So continuity becomes something that is so important for this Chelsea team. To constantly change your centre-back pairing, even though they're available and the injury side of it isn't an excuse anymore, you can't just keep changing something that's working and expect results to be consistent. The team selection is inconsistent, therefore the results are inconsistent. When you look at the top teams in the Premier League right now, they've either got smaller squads full of quality players with like-for-like players that can come in, like a Manchester City, even Arsenal to an extent as well. But there's an adaptable element to what these managers are doing. It's systemic to the point where Man City, Arsenal in particular, I'll use these two as an examples because they're clearly above everyone else in the league. And Arteta is a disciple of Pep Guardiola. Like, it's not a surprise that they both kind of play in a similar way. But through this systemic approach that both of these teams have, there is an element of pragmatism. Whereas with Chelsea, I feel as though there's not really been a system, but then at the same time, when it comes to the need and necessity to be pragmatic, we've very rarely seen it this season. If you take the halftime team talk that we saw against Arsenal, compare that to what we saw against Aston Villa. From what I can gauge and decipher from the Arsenal one, we're 1-0 down, but because it's Arsenal, we've probably got no chance. There's no Cole Palmer, so capitulate. Let's not change anything. And that's what we saw. Against Aston Villa, Pochettino's looking at it and he's thinking, hang on a minute, we might be 2 goals down, but Aston Villa just haven't really shown up here. They've had 2 good shots and scored 2 goals, but we got 70% of the possession. We're starting to dominate midfield battles. Caicedo's doing well. So let's move Cucurella into kind of like a left central midfield position. Mudryk hasn't really done much on the left wing. This is how I saw it anyway. Mudryk's done pretty much nothing on the left wing. If we just narrow the pitch slightly, move Cucurella into that more centralised position when we're in possession, then we can absolutely dominate the Aston Villa midfield, which makes it easier to get into the final third. We can get some shots away and we can score some goals. That is pragmatic coaching. That is changing something adaptably in a game to take it from something that isn't quite working, but you've got the solution, so you offer it, you change it, and you do it. And to be fair, in the 6 Things We Learned video, look, I was away with the fairies, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. Not my proudest video that I've ever done. And I do think I was very harsh on Cucurella, because when I think about that second half performance, he was actually very good, playing in that different kind of role. And I think he took on board Pochettino's demands and requests, very well. But yeah, I was all over the place this weekend. I had the flu, spent the whole weekend on the sofa. My glands are still firing on all cylinders in there, but we're back and we're feeling good. So, with Pochettino, yes, it's difficult to implement a system when you've got so many injuries and you've got so many young players who might not necessarily have the brain capacity yet as footballers to take on board what you're saying. But if that's the case, then you've only got what you've got to work with, right? So be pragmatic. Change the game more often. This season, the reason I've got so tired with Pochettino is because too often, in the second half of matches, if it's not been going well in the first, we capitulate rather than turn it around. And for me, that is poor management, and it's a sackable offence. It's as simple as that. If more often than not your team gets worse after your manager's had a go at you in the ear, then there's a serious problem there. That's the facts for me. Now, this all kind of ties in to variability within the game. In-game tactics and the way that Chelsea play, it shouldn't just be the case of give it to Cole Palmer, hope that he puts it in the back of the net, and if Cole Palmer scores, Chelsea have a chance. What we saw in that game against Aston Villa, to bring it back to the Cucurella point, was Cucurella getting a bit more advanced up the field, kind of acting as that left central midfielder to give Chelsea an extra man in the midfield. Caicedo, with Gallagher alongside him, also just seems a lot more confident. With Enzo alongside him, I feel as though Caicedo's had to be like a 1.5 man situation with Enzo a lot of the time this season. Whereas with Gallagher, you know that he's going to do a lot of the running. Chelsea overloaded the Aston Villa midfield to get the ball into that final third, as we've already said, and then we will get shots away. We were even getting shots away in the first half, but notice a lot of them were from outside the area, because that's where we were restricted to, because Aston Villa were playing the low block. Chelsea then dominate the midfield, get the ball in the final third easier because we've got overloads of players in there, and the shots come in from higher XG positions. Let's just say that, for want of any kind of better terms. So, if Mauricio Pochettino is to stay as the Chelsea manager next season, in a nutshell, he needs to completely reverse what we have seen this season in terms of the second half and in-game variability, pragmatic coaching. We saw it against Aston Villa. It shows that this Chelsea team, even though they're young, even though half the squad are out injured pretty much every week, there is still enough about these players to be able to get a game and be like, right, we might be losing. Things might not be going so well, but we can adapt. We can change it. We can be flexible with the way that we progress up the field and the way that we play. And I think this will come, no matter who the manager is, Chelsea buying some experienced players this summer is just so necessary on every single possible level. There is not a single part of me, or I hope there's not a single part of any of you that believes the strategy of just buying under 21 players is a good idea. It's not. It's an awful idea, and it needs to change. There's also the comments here from Pochettino that we see in almost all press conferences, especially after defeats. We need to show we are Chelsea. Now, when you've just arrived as a manager, it's your first season, and you've been under scrutiny all season, I think there's a lot of people significantly more qualified than Pochettino when it comes to addressing what being Chelsea is. Being Chelsea means that you show fight. Being Chelsea means that you show passion. And it means that there is a core and a strength that comes from within, where you don't capitulate the way that we have so many times. And I think that will have to come with signings. That will have to come with experience being brought into this team. But when I look across the field and I look at the players that I think have been the most important ones this season, I think Gusto, Caicedo, I think Gallagher also, 14 goals and assists. No matter what you think of Conor Gallagher, he's been important for us and massive this season. Palmer, and I think like Jackson, but like it's very far away from those four. I think Gusto, Caicedo, Palmer, and Conor Gallagher have been the four best players. And Nicholas Jackson, the stats are good, but then there's so much he needs to improve on, but then it's also dependent on his role. So if Pochettino is going to stay, which is what this video has all been about, then he needs to change a lot. And a lot of that is going to come to the mentality and the way that he treats the players. I think he's been so soft on these players this season. And I think a lot of that might be down to trying to protect them in the media, but then at the same time, like there's got to be some standards. There has to be serious standards that have to be upheld. You look at the Man City Netflix documentary, which I spent all weekend watching on the TV. The way that Pep Guardiola talks to the players, he's either fully in love with them or the way that he addresses them when they're losing, it's almost as if he's like goading the response. If you're a player where you know the manager thinks you're amazing, but then he's like, you don't really want to win the Premier League anymore, do you? It's almost like borderline sarcasm. Having someone kind of tickle that side of you that you want to just bite and respond. And I think Pochettino, as much as the players might like him because he's approachable, the players seem to like him because, I think it's because he's soft. There isn't that hard side of him yet that Pochettino has shown these players, because I think sometimes a bit of tough love is necessary. And I think Poch hasn't found the balance yet between the players might like him, but I think it's because the players want an easy ride when things are clearly not going so well on the field. I'm still not sure that Pochettino is the right man. I do think there can be a better manager out there to utilise the squad that we've already got and seem to manage the integration of new players coming in also. That's my thoughts, but to me it looks quite likely that Pochettino stays, because I do think Chelsea will make some form of European football. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys later.